Hello, and welcome to Voices from the Field, a Mayford podcast where we talk with educators in the field to hear about their perspectives and experiences. My name is Jake Burson, Advocacy Chair for Mayford, and today we're joined by someone who has dedicated her career to one powerful question: how do we help people truly reach their potential? Welcome to the show, Dr. Riegel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Here's a short bio about Dr. Riegel. Dr. Riegel started her career in education driven by one goal: to help people reach their potential. Over time, she realized that fulfillment, whether in a classroom, company, or community, comes from understanding how the brain drives behavior and how systems shape success. That discovery became the foundation for her life's work. As an educator, researcher, and author, she has spent 2 decades helping schools, leaders, parents, and organizations align brain science with human systems, creating cultures where people feel connected, capable, and in control of their growth. Dr. Riegel earned a bachelor's degree in English in secondary education from Kent State University, and she also holds a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from Otterbein University, and a PhD in education policy and leadership from the Ohio State University. Her work has appeared in peer-reviewed journals, and she has authored 5 books, including her 2 latest books, NeuroWell and Aspirations to Operations, focused on brain science and how we can leverage it to help people become happier, healthier, and more successful. Dr. Rigo, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. But before we get started, what's making you smile these days?
I think what's really making me smile is that people are finally waking up to the idea that real change starts in the brain. And the work I've been doing in schools over the past couple of years, teachers are really receptive to the information and to, what do I do about this and how do I help students become happier and healthier and more successful? And I've done training for many, many years. And, sometimes you do training and people just kind of look over their glasses at you like, oh, here's another thing. But when we start talking about brain science, I think it not only helps teachers, but it helps students as well, because teachers get a little bit of self-awareness of how their brain works, and it can help them be more effective teachers and reduce burnout.
That's fantastic. So, Dr. Rigo, where and how did your path in education actually begin?
Well, it's actually, I have a very crooked path.
Yeah.
So I graduated, my first degree was in English literature. So, I went into sales and I was selling automatic greasing systems for semis and off-road construction equipment. And then I also sold the technology that's now OnStar, but it was before Westinghouse purchased that. So I did that for a couple years and I was successful by all the data that you look at. I had, making good money. I had a house, I had a car, I had all these things, but I was really miserable. So when I was about 25, I did a hard reset, quit my job, and I just threw a backpack on and went to Florida for a few weeks and walked around. And I was like, what do I want to do? And from a personal standpoint, I was like, I want people to be happy. I want me to be happy. I want to help other people be happy. So I decided I wanted to work with kids. And I went back in and got my second bachelor's degree in education and started teaching.
Wow. So that backpack trip you're talking about really helped reset what you wanted to do and your ambition, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
call it my quarter life crisis. And I really recommend everybody has one because it gave me a minute to align. I was on somebody else's path and I hadn't really thought about what made me happy. I'd really just more thought about what my expectations were for my family or, just get a job kind of thing. And then once I was in education, I taught for 9 years and then I was an administrator for 2 years. And then after having a series of effective leaders and then ineffective leaders, I
Mhm.
decided to study leadership. So I went to the Ohio State University. I have to say the Ohio State University and studied leadership. But what I was really interested in was the human system in leadership more so than the policy. That kind of started my passion toward, let's use the science to help us create spaces that are going to help people be more productive and fulfilled.
So would you say that your time the Ohio State is what made you become interested in neuroscience?
Yeah, I think it started my interest and I was really doing a lot of work with like social science, like science on motivation and engagement, pieces like that. And then I started doing some work in special education for the state of Ohio. And that really got me interested in actually the science of what's going on. When you look at neurodivergent people, like what's actually happening in the brain. So I started really digging into that and I was like, this is something we should all know. And so even with the the listeners you have, especially with like health and physical wellness. I mean, we should be teaching about the brain and helping kids learn, self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-control in a scope and sequence that spans all the way through.
I agree. And in your book, NeuroWell, which I bought actually, I think you mentioned in one of the pages talking about how we have to teach the students first as opposed to the content first. Sometimes you get caught up as maybe beginning teachers, even veteran teachers teaching just the content. What are we trying to cover? What are you trying to have the kids learn? But if we really don't make those connections, right, then
Right.
we're not having as much of an impact as we could be. So like you said, that brain science and really knowing how it works is so important.
Yeah, we need to teach kids first. And I think the accountability movement, and I'm not anti testing or anti accountability at all, but I think what it did was it shifted teachers away from I teach students to I teach content. And the system itself, we measure what matters and what we measure matters. So the system is measuring student data outcomes. And so teachers really shifted to align their practice that way, but it hasn't really worked very well. Our gaps persist, and we've got a real disengagement problem in the country with students. We've got, absenteeism problems. So I feel like we need to, as a whole education industry, we need to kind of shift back to the human piece of what we do.
So along those lines, you mentioned you work as a teacher, administrator, you're an author, coach, and consultant. What thread kind of connects all these roles for you?
I think it's the people, like really being able to look at a system, and whether it's an individual who's trying to figure out how to lead something and struggling, or a teacher who's struggling, I feel like I connect really well with people and help them understand themselves better, which gives them that sense of self-control and self-awareness. And it's exciting because then I feel like I watch them blossom into doing things that they didn't even know they could do.
Interesting. So in your book, you talk about NeuroWell culture. Can you describe a little bit more about that to someone who's not familiar with that concept?
Sure. So NeuroWell culture is basically safe, supportive, and proactive. So in schools, we talk a lot about safety, but we're really focused on physical safety when we have those conversations. And what I encourage people to think about is emotional safety and intellectual safety. Because if we don't feel emotionally safe, or if we're coming to school every day and the work isn't differentiated and I have no idea what I'm doing, all of that impacts the biology of our brain to say, hey, we're in stress. And then our stress systems go into a 5 alarm fire, and then we can't think, so we can't learn. So it becomes this cycle. So that safety piece is really about more than just physical safety. And then the supportive piece is about a shift from compliance and control and completion and credentialing to a shift that's more human focused, about building agency and power and a sense of self and goals and, future passions, and really helping to develop those relationships with students, rather than a lot of classrooms that I'm in are very much about like, I have to get through the content. You need to sit there and listen to me and then tell me what you learn. And then the proactive piece, like I always ask teachers of young kids, I'm like, so can you predict that they're going to roll around on the carpet and poke each other? And they're like, yeah, I can predict that. And I'm like, then why are you angry when they do it? Like, they need to move, they want to engage with each other. And if rolling around on the carpet isn't the right thing to be doing, then we need to insert places for them to learn how to appropriately socially engage. So it's really about thinking ahead and planning routines in your classroom, thinking, how do I set up a structure that promotes executive function development and emotional regulation as just part of my way of doing business in the classroom community that I build.
So you obviously visited many classrooms in many institutions. What's one or two practices or one or two things that you've seen that have been good as far as giving students a sense of agency?
Yeah.
So,
So one thing I would say, well, for a sense of agency,
mhm.
I would say when I was a teacher, I used to co-design the assessment with the student. And this is kind of scary. So this is like a bigger leap from a teacher that's, wherever they are, if they're like, they're going to think this lady's crazy. But what I did was I said, okay, why are we learning this? So like I had a book I was teaching To Kill a Mockingbird. And so I said to the students when we finished, I said, okay, so this is why we read the book. And I went back to the standards and I said, this is what character development is, and this is what you should be able to demonstrate. This is what understanding a theme in a book and the, purpose of the book should be. And so I had a rubric that I created that was a standards-based rubric. And then I said, okay, I have a traditional test and you can take that, or show me how you know. You can show me any way you want. And I had this girl, she was not a great student. She was like a C-minus student and, just kind of came to school, but she loved modern dance. So she came up and she's like, can I do a dance? And I thought, oh boy. So I was like, well, I said they could do this. So I just said to her, you need to make sure that whatever you do, I'm grading it based on this criteria. So you could dance the Nutcracker for me and flunk this assignment because if it doesn't align with this. And she's like, no, I got it. I got it. And I said, okay. So she came in for the assessment day and she had created a move for each character. First, she told us about modern dance, which was super interesting because I didn't know anything about it. Then she had created a move and a little snippet of music for each character. And she explained why that move was representative of the growth of that character in the novel and how the music supported that. Then she strung the music together and did this whole dance and explained to us how the dance was representative of the theme within the book and how the different characters interacted. And I was completely blown away. Like I could not have ever assigned that. And I tapped into something she had a passion about, and I connected that emotion and experience to the content. And I guarantee you, she still knows that book. So that's the kind of agency and power. Now that's a big example. A smaller example is thinking about emotional regulation. So we all have bad days. So one of the routines I teach is called fizzy or flat. And so I get a can of soda and I shake it up and I take it outside and pop it and it explodes everywhere. And I tell kids, we are just like that can of carbonated liquid. Like you're carbonated, I'm carbonated, but I can't see inside your can. So if you come to school and you're super fizzy, fizzy soda tastes gross and flat soda tastes gross. So if you come and you're fizzy or flat, as you walk in the door, just say fizzy or flat. And what I'm going to do is give you some grace and space to go in, sit down, get yourself regulated, and then you let me know when you're ready to learn. And what we do in classrooms a lot is we don't acknowledge that they come in feeling already agitated. And then we start with the like, hey, Jake, where's your homework? Do you have your homework? Why don't you have your pencil? This and that, and then the kid just escalates and either shuts down or explodes. So even something as simple as a fizzy or flat says you have a voice. You can tell me when you're feeling okay, and I'm going to respect the fact that you need a little bit of space. And we as adults expect that. If we're having a bad day or something horrible's going on in our life, we expect our colleagues to be thoughtful, compassionate with us, but we don't always extend that to the students.
That's interesting. And that's something that somebody could implement tomorrow, right? This
Yeah,
fizzy or
super
flat.
easy.
Yeah, very easy
Super
concept.
easy. Yep.
Very cool. So, Dr. Riegel, when you're working with leaders or organizations for the first time, what's one of the first changes you like to help them make or kind of get them to reflect on?
The first thing I really ask for is clarity. So, I'm amazed at how teachers are exhausted. They are told to do 4,000 things, and then every year it's some new buzzword and word salad, and we're doing this now. And so I always ask the leaders, in regard to like a NeuroWell culture. Okay, so we've read the book, you understand what it is. I've done some preliminary training. Now, what do you want to see? What do you want to hear? And being really specific about that, because I think sometimes, teachers don't know what they're supposed to do. And I was doing a project once where the school wanted teachers to use more inquiry learning. And this woman, I was doing an evaluation on it, and this woman was the best inquiry learning teacher I've ever seen. And I asked her, hey, can I videotape you as part of this evaluation? Because this is great. And she was like, oh, I don't know. She goes, you can videotape me, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. And it broke my heart because I was like, not only are you doing it right, you should be a superstar and your principal should be in here all the time giving you props about what you're doing. So I think, helping to prep the leaders that they can't just provide information to teachers and then just expect them to run with it. They have to have some understanding of what they want to see and hear so that they can support it, they can celebrate it, they can provide that little hit of energy as we try. Anytime you try to change habits, it's exhausting. So if a teacher's trying to put new routines in place, you want to be able to celebrate and say, hey, I notice you. I see what you're doing. I appreciate it. It's working, and giving them some of that positive feedback.
So that would be from the administrator's point of view, right? Kind of encourage, or a coach, building coach, try to encourage them to those small wins and
Yeah.
having those small successes.
Yep.
Excellent. So you mentioned this lady about she was really good at inquiry. Can you talk a little bit more about what was impressive to you? What made it good? I just want to hear more about that.
Yeah, so inquiry learning is basically the idea that you give the students all the information. And I think this is a misconception for teachers across the board that I've seen over and over is that I have to give them all the information. I have to teach it all to them before they can do anything with it. And inquiry kind of flips that on its head and it says, let them explore and let the answers emerge. And so when you do inquiry learning, you do like a little chunk where you give them some challenges and then you let them figure some things out. So, like, for example, I was working with a 8th grade science teacher and they were doing a unit on electricity. And the kids were supposed to have had electricity in like 5th grade. So she gave a pretest and she was super irritated. She's like, didn't they teach this in 5th grade? They were supposed to have had this. And I said, well, let's look at your test. So we looked at the test and I was like, well, this is a vocabulary test. So, like, can you define meiosis and mitosis for me right now if you weren't a science teacher? Like you recognize the words, but it's been a minute since you've done anything with it. So I said, why don't you do this instead? Take light bulbs and circuits and switches and just throw them on the desk. And when the kids come in, that you guys have a challenge. You have 5 minutes. See if you can get the light bulb to light up and write down everything that you try along the way. So they would write down everything they try, and some kids would get the light bulb lit, some wouldn't. And then after the 5 minutes, then she says, okay, so, what did you do in your group, Jake? And you'd say, well, we tried this, and she'd be like, I'm so glad you tried that because that's a common misconception. So she created like a T-chart that said, these are the things that are what doesn't work, and these are the things that work. So she was sharing that teaching, and the kids were giving a chance to problem solve. And what I hear in schools all the time today is kids cannot go through a productive struggle. The minute they don't know what they're doing, they escalate and shut down, or they need the teacher to tell them. So this kind of model of instruction helps kids to start building that persistence and resilience when they try something and it doesn't work.
I love that, and it also kind of helps them be held more accountable too. And it's a different type of learning, different type of structure. No, I love that a lot.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, when you think about retention, our brain learns through repetition, experience, and emotion. So, like, I've had 2 kids. I don't need to have 40 of them to remember the experience of having a kid, right? Because it was highly emotional, highly experiential. But if you asked me to solve a trigonometry problem, I probably couldn't remember how to do it, even though I did repetition, repetition, repetition. And that's what I see in schools a lot, is a lot of content transfer. I have the content, I'm telling you the content, but we're missing the experience and the emotion. So when you have kids doing things together where they're trying stuff, they're experimenting, they're getting a chance to think in school, then all of a sudden you're adding that experience and that emotion to the learning experience, and they'll retain the information better.
So at these workshops or PDs that you give, do educators sometimes say we don't have time to do this, or we don't have the wherewithal? And how would we go about changing that kind of mindset?
Yeah. So one thing that, and this is kind of a glib answer, but you don't have time not to, because what you're doing right now isn't necessarily working. You've got, your method, your teaching. And one of the things I teach is to divide your class into what I call learning sprints. And so we know that we have about 10 minutes of attention, and that's generous in some settings, right? So like, I've sat in classroom observations and teachers will spend 15 minutes just going over the instructions. You've already lost half of your kids. So then when they start to work, they don't know what they're doing. And then now they're asking you, and all those minutes that are spent trying to manage the noise in the classroom or get everybody to listen. So the learning sprint, and this is truly one of the most effective strategies that I teach. Everywhere I go, when teachers try this, they're just like, wow. And I'm like, yeah, it's super easy. So you take your lesson and you say, okay, we're going to align it with what we know about the brain's ability to focus and maintain attention. So set a timer for 10 minutes, put the timer up on the whiteboard, or, some of the teachers of younger kids have like hourglasses or something. So you put it up there and you say, okay, we're going to do a learning sprint for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to give you a brain break. So the learning sprint, you're going to listen to me for a couple minutes when I give you instructions, and then you're going to have some time to work independently. So during this learning sprint, there's no reason to talk because it really should be about you working independently. And then we'll take a brain break. And then during the brain break, you can infuse some positivity. You can do some social engagement stuff that can be a turn and talk. And the first thing I hear from teachers when I tell them to break their class up is, well, I'm never going to be able to get them back if I let them talk for 2 minutes. And it actually is the opposite. The kids fall right into a rhythm. I had a kindergarten teacher that did this. She said within 3 days, kids were like trained and they loved it because they were learning, number one, how long is 10 minutes? Number two, what can I accomplish when I focus in 10 minutes? So I feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. Like, look at all that I got done. And when I really buckled down, they learn how to chunk work, because that's something that, if you 40 things on your to-do list, it's stressful. So it kept the stress level down because it was little bites of learning. And then the learning breaks where they got, they started doing like in the lower grades, they do like, okay, you guys can either go over there and dance for 2 minutes, or you can turn to your neighbor and just have a conversation. You can draw. And I encourage teachers to give kids choices rather than have whole class like brain breaks. And then you go back to the learning sprint. And what I have heard from literally 100% of the teachers who have done this is, wow, we are getting through stuff so much faster. And it's like, yeah, you are, because the kids are focusing when they need to focus, as opposed to spending 40 minutes trying to get the room quiet. And a lot of kids can't learn in a noisy environment. So it gives a good learning environment and then a little break. Learning. And you can make them 15 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on what you're doing in the class. And then if you're doing like inquiry projects or active engaging projects, then you could say we're going to spend 20 minutes working in teams. And because kids are active, they don't lose their attention span as fast. But a lot of school is auditory, listening to the teacher, and our brain just cannot process that. I mean, even think about like when you've gone to a professional development day.
Well, I was just going to say that. I think we should tie everything you're talking about into PD for adults. We need to have these sprints, and then we need to have these breaks. Then the sprints and breaks, because instead of sitting through a 3-hour PD. So very interesting. So I'm sure you've seen the images of the brain after exercise or after movement, how it lights up in more color. So what exactly is happening in that instance after a movement break?
Yeah, so I think part of it is, well, there's a couple things that could be happening. One is that our vagus nerve plays a big role in our stress regulation system. So the vagus nerve is really involved in interoception, which is your heart beating, is your stomach emptying, is your, are your lungs working, all the internals, like a systems manager. And then it also monitors in proprioception, which is where is your body in space. When you don't know where your body is in space, or when you're not grounded to what's going on, then your vagus nerve sends signals to your thalamus, which is your sort of data manager, sends signals there that says, hey, we might be in trouble. I don't know. Heart seems weird, or I don't know where my feet are. We could be standing next to a cliff. And when the vagus nerve is calm, then we don't react as much in stressful situations. And then when you add a little bit of competition or a little bit of performance, we get just a little jolt of the stress chemicals. And so it makes us more alert and it makes us more awake because we're physically active and doing something that the brain interprets as, a little bit of stress. It's eustress, EU, it's good stress. So I've actually read that the best thing you can do before a job interview is go run on the treadmill for 20 minutes and then take your shower and go to the job interview, because those stress chemicals will be in your brain and you'll be more focused and sharp. And I actually read a story about, I can't remember if it was Baltimore, might have been Baltimore. It was a B out in the East was the city. But basically all they did to change their math scores is they put PE class ahead of math for the kids who were struggling in math, and their scores went up.
Interesting. I love to hear that. It's funny you mentioned that, because we have something called the MCAS in Massachusetts, and I was talking to the principal a few years back, and I showed him this picture that I'm referencing, and ever since that day I showed it to him, every time we have an MCAS, he has the students come down to the gym, walk 4 or 5 laps, and then they go back up. And so he saw the value in that. He didn't say much. He didn't make a big deal of it, but he saw the value in having the students move to help them focus better. So,
well, and the other thing I would say is teach kids that that's what's happening. Don't just say, we're going to go down to the gym, get you ready for the test. Like, teach them why.
Mm.
And I think that's something that we miss. I go into schools and see wiggle breaks or movement breaks through the class, but the kids don't understand why they're beneficial. So they're not something that they take and apply in their regular life outside of school.
Interesting. Yeah, that kind of leads me to my next question is, in your experience, what are some common misconceptions about motivation or behavior either in schools or workplaces? What do you see?
Yeah. So the number one thing I would say is behavior is always, whether it's work behavior, social behavior, academic behavior, yours, mine, anybody. The behavior is the intersection of our biology and our context. And so when we understand the biology and we create a positive context, then we can be really proactive and we can prevent problems from starting. And when one does arise, we can reframe the problem and have a better solution. So I think the biggest misconception is that teachers think that students misbehave because they're choosing to. And what I see a lot of times when I go in and observe kids is that the limbic system of their brain is basically dictating their action and their behavior, not the part of their brain that makes them who they are. So when you think of just in a like 1 minute explainer, you've got this data manager, which is your thalamus. He takes in all the information from the environment, and he's in the part of your brain that doesn't have consciousness, you know, doesn't tell a story, can't tell time, just operates on sensory associations. When I feel this way, am I in danger? And this part of your brain is always about survival. So it's actually always looking for threats to make sure it's prepared when one happens.
Hmm.
So if he sends a report to your security monitor, and I name these parts. So I call my data manager Harold. I call my security monitor Bob. So Harold takes in all the information. He makes sensory associations of like what I'm feeling now is similar to before. Because if every new experience was brand new, our brain would explode. So we have to find patterns. So then he sends a message to Bob and says either, hey, we're in trouble, or I don't know what this means. This report has conflicting, I'm not sure how we should react. If we're in trouble, then Bob wails on the panic button. We go into a stress reaction where we are in alarm. And at that point, the message is sent up to the CEO of our head that says, hey, we're going to keep you alive. So go get a cup of coffee or something. We don't need you right now. And we'll call you when we're safe again. And that's why sometimes when you're really angry and then you kind of calm down, you're like, why did I say that? That's not even who I am. Like, I don't know why I did that. And it's because you didn't. Harold and Bob did that and you were out having a cup of coffee. What we want to try to do is teach people to go in the alert phase rather than the alarm phase. Because if Harold says to Bob, I'm not really sure how to react, we should weigh in with the boss, then Bob just taps the button and it sends an emergency message to the front of your brain that says, hey, I need your logic, reasoning. I need you to think our way through this and tell us how you want us to respond. And so when people understand that what they are doing is actually witnessing an event where a kid, Bob and Harold have taken over the brain, then I recognize that this is not about me. This is about how that child's brain is associating something going on in this context with an underlying fear that's making their body dysregulate. And I see people try to process behavior with kids, and this part of the brain can't tell you why they did that. So instead of processing what happened, what we should be doing is processing, why do you think your brain, and I'd say, why do you think Harold and Bob, were freaking out and pulled the fire alarm on this? And getting the kids to think about really the fear beneath that, whatever the trigger was in the environment that made them misbehave. So that's the biggest misconception, is getting people away from that idea of this kid's a jerk and he needs punished, to really saying this kid doesn't have self-awareness, self-regulation, or self-control. And that's a teachable moment. I can help that kid learn to do that. And sometimes kids do act dumb because they're kids and they make mistakes, and that's different.
Mm.
But when you've got some of these kids that are consistently shutting down or acting out in class, I would argue that 9 times out of 10, there's something going on in the stress regulation system.
That definitely takes a mind shift for some
Yeah.
teachers.
Yeah.
Because some folks take it personally, like he did this to me, she did this to me, but
Right.
it's not always like you're saying. It's not about that. It's about something happening in the brain. So
Right.
very
Right.
interesting.
And it doesn't mean I'm not a person who doesn't believe in consequences. I mean, you can ask my 2 kids, they're 20 and 23.
Mm.
They knew, they got the look, they were in trouble. But it's not about like those consequences don't change behavior. Because if you haven't changed the science of what's going on, the biology in there, then a similar context is going to have they're going to have the same reaction.
Interesting. So you have several books out. I'd like to ask you about your most recent book. What's the title of it, and what can readers expect from it?
So the most recent is Aspirations to Operations, and it's a leader's guide to making transformation stick. And it goes through it really applies the brain science to the adults in the education. Well, and it's industry agnostic, so any leader could use it, but it applies to the adults in the system. So it provides a framework for how to build a safe culture, how to build kind of a NeuroWell culture within the organization,
Mm-hmm.
and then how to frame change. So you asked earlier, and I said clarity was really important. So there's an 8C framework that I go through in the book, and the first C is culture, because you can't grow anything if the ground isn't fertile.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's 3 planning C's, so clarity, coherence, and cadence. And this is something else that, even going back to why are we in this situation, it's a lot of times because teachers are overwhelmed by the expectations and the lack of clarity of what they're doing. I worked with a school once that said, we're doing universal design for learning. That's our instructional model. And I said, okay, what's that look like or sound like when you're doing it? And nobody could answer me. And then the teachers were like, oh, yeah, is that pillar thing we did like 3 years ago? And the superintendent was like, we spent $40,000 on that pillar thing that they don't even know what it is. And I'm like, yeah, but you never clarified what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then the curriculum director bought direct instruction curriculum. So now you want universal design for learning and you have direct instruction curriculum. That's not coherent. And so now I'm going to fail no matter what I do. And then the cadence piece, a lot of times, somebody like me will come in and do a training and it's like, well, now you were trained, go do it. And a change doesn't happen like that. So it kind of goes through like, what's going on in people's brains when they're resisting, and how, as a leader, do you help to overcome that? So that's the first set. The second set of C's is the engagement. So it's collaboration and coaching, and using that brain science lens for how do we encourage people and support them as they try hard things. And then the last set of C's is the sustainability ones. And there's communication and celebration. And that's what I really don't see a lot of in schools, is really authentic celebration that serves to drive motivation and engagement. People have like a teacher luncheon or something, which is nice. Everybody enjoys the food, but that type of celebration isn't going to move the needle to organizational improvement.
There's a teacher appreciation week.
Yeah.
That.
Well, and that's the thing, is it's an appreciation and it's great,
Right.
and everybody
Right.
enjoys the soup and it's nice.
Right.
Parents bring stuff in, but that's not going to improve instruction.
From listening to you talk about this as a framework, I really like that there's tangible steps that people can take to make a change. It's not just about theory. It's not just about talking about it, but when the rubber hits the road, what are you actually doing to make a change, to make an impact?
Each chapter has like actual tools that I've used successfully to help schools move the needle and really do some transformative things. I taught at Ohio State for a while in the leadership program and taught a lot of aspiring principals, and they learn a lot of org theory and policy and structure stuff, but we don't really help them understand the humans in the system. So there's a huge learning gap. And then when that happens, if you have a dysregulated teacher because they're in a climate with a non-supportive principal, you're not going to have success in the classroom.
Interesting. So as we come to a close, Dr. Riegel, if you could leave our audience with one idea about human behavior or brain science, what would it be?
I would say that learning it is critical to being happy, healthy, and successful, because when you understand, and you don't have to go into a deep dive, but just basic understanding of how your brain is processing information, making perceptions, and sort of driving behavior and attitude, then now we have self-awareness, and then we can regulate that. We can send 80% of the traffic in our brain is below our nose in that limbic system, and it's unconscious to us. Being self-aware and in self-control is learning how to drive more traffic from the part of the brain that makes you you. And when you take the time to really do some of that introspection and understanding your brain, it becomes so much easier to be happy. We get to choose if we're happy. And if we choose to be happy and fulfilled, then we need to be intentional about how we shift our brain to make sure that it's saying, yeah, I'll help get you there.
Interesting. So all of this information is in the books you have too, right? The NeuroWell,
Yes.
The aspirations
Yep.
to operations. That's fantastic.
Yep.
And all that's on Amazon?
Yes, it's on Amazon. So if the teachers are listening, they find the NeuroWell book really helpful. And there's tons of actionable strategies, step by step, like the learning communities. I go right through step by step how to set that up. So it's not an aspirational book. It's here's what you can do and adapt it into your classroom. And then if you're a school leader, NeuroWell can give you some context in what kind of culture you need to build and what kinds of practices you need to see in a classroom. And then the aspirations to operations gives you the roadmap to help lead that change in your building.
It's fantastic. So, Dr. Riegel, how can our listeners connect with you? Is there a website they can go to? Is there a
Sure.
social media? What's the best way?
Yeah, so they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I also have a website. It's just lisariegel.com. And then if they want to hear me on other podcasts or read more about the education side of the work I do, because I work in education and in the private sector, they can go to EP Institute, Educational Partnerships Institute. So epinstitute.net. And I have, recorded episodes of other people who've had me on as a guest, and they can get a real flavor of the work that I'm doing and how I can help.
Yeah, I think that'll be super helpful for our listeners to hear some other episodes as well. So that's great. So, Dr. Riegel, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and expertise insight with us. It's been really great having you on.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Listeners, if today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to check out Dr. Riegel's latest books, NeuroWell and Aspirations to Operations, where she dives even deeper into how brain science can transform the way we lead, learn, and live. And as always, if you found value in this episode, please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.